We'd seen the livery, now we've seen the real McLaren MCL38. Well, except for the parts of McLaren's 2024 F1 car that are being hidden. Secrecy is nothing new in F1, especially in launch season, and McLaren's not alone in holding stuff back, as we see things like dummy wings and flaws and deceptive renders all the time. But McLaren's been particularly careful not to reveal some sensitive areas of the car in the images of the MCL38 it has shared, which we understand is mostly the real thing that ran in the shakedown at Silverstone on Wednesday. McLaren has recent history of altering images of its car once it breaks cover for real, and did it last year when it wasn't even happy with its launch spec. Given it had an underwhelming 2022 and its 2023 car was really uncompetitive at the start of last season, there wasn't really much worth hiding 12 months ago. But things are very different now. If all goes according to plan, the new McLaren is a car that its rivals, and maybe even Red Bull, should fear. And McLaren clearly thinks it has some details worth hiding given the lengths it's gone to not show us too much of the car. There are some basic tactics at play here, like limiting the number of images available, being very specific with the angles to disguise certain areas, and fitting what look like basic wings and a simple floor. The closer up you get though, the more is concealed. Whatever's on the floor edge in the side-on image McLaren released, for example, seems to have been brushed out in the more close-up 3/4 angle. The area at the back of the front suspension and into the central section of the floor is very dark in the head-on image, which makes it tough to pick out more detail. And what is clearly a very different sidepod inlet approach, assuming it is real, which we think it is largely disguised by the distance and darkness of the side-on shot and things like the front wheel and front suspension in others. McLaren running this car at Silverstone, where spy shots often start leaking out, and doing it on the same day as Mercedes, means this car gets out into the open a little earlier than if it had waited until Bahrain like last year. That's why, at least for now, McLaren's hiding some design ideas in the images it can control. So what can we see? An innovative evolution is what team principal Andrea Stella promised us with the MCL38, and there are clear signs of that. The sidepod inlet looks the most visibly different approach with an overbite style rather than underbite. While other teams are going for the underbite pioneered by Red Bull with its aggressive letterbox shape, it looks like McLaren is exploring a new path, having gone in that initial Red Bull direction itself last year. Red Bull might be moving away from the trend it sparked too, based on some grainy spy shots of the RB20. Linked to that is a design similar to how Mercedes used the upper side impact protection structure as a wing, although McLaren's is not as independent or as aggressive. McLaren appears to have moved some radiator furniture away from the front of the sidepod to create space, which has allowed it to expose the upper SIPS bar just below the mirror. The intention may be to energise the airflow going along the top surface of the sidepod, but this could be more inefficient as any airflow spillage from the inlet may head off in different directions instead of being channelled up and over, and that may impact subsequent flow structures. The rest of the sidepod shape behind is clearly an evolution from last year, a bigger initial undercut leading into a slightly bulbous shaped but tighter sidepod than before, in line with the prevailing trend across the grid to assist the airflow to the back of the floor. Away from the aero surfaces, pull rod front and push rod rear suspension remain, but in modified forms. The front suspension does look like it has a considerable increase in anti-dive as the upper wishbone rear leg is mounted lower inboard, which will aim to keep the front of the car raised under heavy braking to keep the aerodynamic platform under more control. Likewise at the rear, the forward leg of the upper wishbone seems to have been positioned lower. This would be for more anti-squat, stopping the rear dropping too low under acceleration and at high speed when the downforce from the powerful underfloor sucks the rear of the car to the ground. Assuming any imagery that emerges from Silverstone isn't enlightening, we need to wait until Bahrain to verify all the McLaren changes. The MCL38 has a clear connection to its predecessor, so if you're thinking that looks a lot like what ran in Abu Dhabi, yes it does. But this was one of the best cars of 2023 aerodynamically, if not the best at high speed, which makes it more likely that all of those big important aero surfaces don't need the same overhaul that we've seen on, say, the Ferrari or Mercedes. The 2023 form book is no guarantee that McLaren will fight for wins in 2024, let alone prove it is ready to actually beat Red Bull, but there are obvious reasons for other teams to be worried by McLaren's position. For starters, the MCL38 being an evolution of the car that outscored all except Red Bull's dominant RB19 from the Austrian Grand Prix onwards in 2023 can't be a bad place to start from. McLaren went from backmarker to frontrunner in a stunning turnaround that was based on extensive aerodynamic development, raising the car's peaks and making it especially potent on high-speed tracks. With only so much work possible in one season though, Stella often said in 2023 that bigger changes were needed to eliminate the remaining deficits to Red Bull. Obviously we don't know, and neither does McLaren, whether the MCL38 will be good enough given established frontrunners Mercedes and Ferrari have made significant overhauls to their concepts, and Aston Martin is looking to make another ambitious step in 2024. But not having to make such major conceptual overhauls is arguably a big advantage for McLaren because it had proof of concept in 2023 and reckons it is still developing strongly, so can be more confident in its direction. It also has a higher ceiling than last year, with better facilities and new senior technical figures at its disposal, which we'll explain shortly. To understand the trajectory McLaren is on technically, you have to look back to the end of 2022. Then McLaren realised it was going in the wrong direction, which Stella puts down to two things. The first was that the geometry of the car's aerodynamics, in particular the floor, was not up to date. The second was that the ongoing development of the existing concept was starting to run out of steam. McLaren tried to make the best of what it had for the early stages of 2023, but the decision had already been made to introduce a new floor concept, which first appeared at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix in late April. This meant visible changes in the geometry of the floor edges, accompanied by modifications in the underfloor, but it wasn't until the Austrian Grand Prix in July that McLaren's form was transformed thanks to the introduction of a major upgrade focused on the side pods. That marked a visual step towards the Red Bull concept, furthered by another major upgrade package in Singapore that made McLaren Red Bull's biggest threat on high-speed tracks such as Qatar and Suzuka. The 2024 car is effectively a further evolution of the change of direction McLaren started to go in way back in late 2022, yet Stella says there's no signs of diminishing returns with the 2024 car. This proves that not only is McLaren on the right path in terms of car concept, but also that it understands the subtleties of these cars. It's one thing to create something that's an approximation of the dominant machine, but another to make it work. That also reflects wider changes in McLaren's approach. How it digests the aerodynamic data has evolved, reflecting the fundamental change in F1 development under these regulations, given the interaction of the aerodynamics and the mechanical platform is crucial. There are two key areas McLaren needs the MCL38 to be better in to be a genuine challenger for race wins. The first is slow corner performance, which has long been a problem stretching back to well before the 2022 regulation changes. Lando Norris has characterised this weakness as rooted in the front end of the car being very poor at slow speed, combined with its traction being one of the weakest in the field. This problem explains why the McLaren struggles more at tracks with a number of low-speed corners. The hope is this weakness has been improved significantly with this year's car, allowing the drivers to attack the corner entries and also get good exits. The second weakness is what has been characterised as its knife-edge tendencies. Norris has spoken about this for years, meaning a car that when on the edge can be unpredictable and confidence sapping. This problem appears rooted in a combination of the aerodynamic characteristics and the way the tyres behave with significant steering lock added. McLaren hopes that the progress it has made with the MCL38 and evolving its approach to development will tackle this problem. If it does, then McLaren would have a car that can be competitive across a broad range of tracks and corner speed profiles. The 2024 McLaren has been developed using its brand new in-house wind tunnel and simulator since September last year and boosted by improvements to its production facilities. This all gives McLaren better data to work with and a faster process in coming up with ideas, testing them and producing the parts, although this has clearly been pushed to the limit given Stella says not all the areas we want to address have been completed for our launch spec car. Stella is still confident McLaren can hit the ground running though, because the baseline version should be a lot better than a year ago and already has a number of innovations on it. This is partly a result of McLaren already doing a better job with its existing slightly older infrastructure last year after Stella's technical reshuffle. That improvement also means McLaren can have confidence it will be making the most of what its new facilities offer. Stella wants McLaren to capitalise on this horsepower that we have added to the team, which is partly a reference to the facilities and working practices, but also new personnel. The technical organisation finally has its two new senior figures in place who slot into the new three-pronged technical director structure that only had Peter Prodromou, technical director for aerodynamics, in place until now. One arrival is David Sanchez. He has worked with McLaren before but joined Ferrari back in 2012 and rose to become head of vehicle concept. At McLaren, he is now technical director for car concept and performance. The other is Rob Marshall, a linchpin of Red Bull's rise to F1 dominant force, having joined the emerging team back in 2006. He is now McLaren's technical director for engineering and design. Together, they are at the top of the technical tree. For those breaking out in cold chills at the memory of the notorious McLaren Matrix management system that Adrian Newey hated, don't worry, this is something a little different. According to Stella, it's all about avoiding diluting the creativity of these technical leaders and others, and the fact the structure was in place last year in an interim form and played a key role in the development progress is encouraging. This should have continued over the winter to give McLaren a good enough foundation to finally start a season strongly, before developing extensively through the year, beginning with the upgrades Stella has said are already in the works.